Hello and welcome to the Field Guides. I'm Bill and I'm here with Steve. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening, Bill.
And what we're going to do today and over the course of many future episodes is give you the experience of what it's like to be in the woods, in the field, and on the trail. Each month we pick a natural history topic, research the science behind that topic, and then take you out to a natural spot to share with you everything that we've learned. And for today's episode, Steve is finally going to be doing some work. Whoa. All right, we're going to leave that little wind noise in there.
Holy cow, yeah.
Because we want to give people the feel of what it's like to be out here on probably the coldest day in the past week here in Western New York. And Steve chose this day to do our recording.
We were really hoping we'd have much better weather for this episode. But
So today, March 31st, and although it's been spring for a little over a week, we've actually had some spring-like weather here. We are right now, the snow is coming down. We're standing in about, 2-3 inches of snow maybe. And it feels like it's got to be what, 20 degrees maybe?
I think my car said 25.
Okay.
Yeah. Warmer than last episode,
That is
but
true.
colder than it's been lately. Yeah.
And where are we today?
We are at the Beaver Meadow Autobahn Center?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's tough to remember it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Beaver Meadow Audubon Center, and this is where we did our maple sugaring episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my old stomping grounds. This is where I had my first naturalist job. Longtime listeners will know that. And I was actually just here last night for an owl prowl.
Oh, how did that go?
It went very well, but I'm actually going to save talking about that for a little later on.
Okay.
Yeah, a little teaser for later in the episode.
Sounds good.
So as I was saying, I wasn't joking before. The past 2 episodes, Steve's been so busy with work at school that I was covering the research for those episodes. Mm-hmm. But this one, Steve said he wanted to do the work. So I'm interested to see what you came up with.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about the American Woodcock, Scolopax minor.
Yes.
Yeah, and before we get started, I do want to quickly address the most controversial thing I said in the last few episodes, and that is that I mistakenly said the word squanch last episode, which doesn't really mean anything aside from like a Rick and Morty meme, I think. There's a character named Squanchy that says squanch all the time. So I definitely meant to use it in the context of like extinguishing something, and I think I might have combined the word squash, quash, and quench in some way.
I think you used the word squelch in there somewhere, too.
I don't know. Well,
I liked that word.
Yeah, and before I forget, I was wrong about the hickory from last episode with the conspicuous yellow end buds. I was pretty rusty, so I was thinking that it might have been Caria lacinosa. That's the shellbark hickory. But after a quick Google search, it's obviously Caria cordiformis, or the bitternut hickory.
Yes, and I did put that into the episode notes for the last episode.
Oh, good. I wasn't sure if I didn't actually see that in there.
Honestly, I actually cut out all your guesses at the species name. So those weren't even in the last episode.
No. I listened and I said, and I think the specific epithet begins with an L. So I must have been talking about lacinosa because that's the one that I was thinking of.
All right.
I would have kicked myself a few years ago if I misidentified a hickory, but I haven't been in that world for a couple of years, so I don't really feel too bad about getting it wrong.
All right.
I'm
going to stop you for just a sec, though, because we are getting a little wind noise. I apologize for that, folks. Mm-hmm. So why don't we move to a little more sheltered spot?
Okay.
All right.
So you know me. So let's just get the name Woodcock out of the way. So where did this weird common name come from? So it's actually from the Anglo-Saxon woodcock. It just refers to wood, referring to the habitat, and then cock referring to chicken, which is an unrelated species.
And I do have to say, I got to jump in.
Yeah.
So I did not know about this bird until I got the job here.
Oh, really?
So I started way back in February 1998 here, and just a couple months later, in April, the director at the time, my boss, he said, okay, you're going to be doing the Friday night woodcock and spring peeper walks.
Yeah.
And I just looked at him with, complete silence, like, is this a joke?
That's so good.
So I just kind of went along with that until he started telling me. I'm like, oh, he's talking about a bird.
Yeah.
So for the juvenile-minded, like me, among you, don't worry. Once you hear this word, hear the name of this bird, several dozen times, the tendency to start giggling will go away.
Yeah. So, like I said, the name comes from woodcock. which essentially means chicken of the woods.
Chicken of the woods, yeah.
So litiparous can suck it.
What's that?
Well, you mean you don't know mushroom general right off the top of your head? Chicken of the woods.
Chicken of the woods mushroom.
Yeah, it's the bright orange shelf fungus that people like to eat.
Yeah.
Maybe it tastes like chicken. I have no idea.
No, I've eaten it before. It doesn't taste like chicken.
No, okay, yeah.
Oh, I should say, to me, it doesn't taste like chicken.
Sure. Yeah. But in all seriousness, I'm actually fine with the mushroom taking this one because chickens are in the pheasant family, Phaeanidae, which are galliforms, and woodcocks are in the sandpiper family, Scolopacidae, which are charadriiforms. So they're not even close. They don't even have the same general body shape.
That's true.
Yeah, so...
these are messed up birds.
Yeah.
They're a shorebird that doesn't live at the shore.
Exactly, yeah. But at least they're both birds. But I'm weird about names. So I don't mind someone calling a mushroom by a bird's name, but I'm not as happy about someone calling a bird by another unrelated bird's name. But I'll keep calling the woodcock since no one uses the binomial nomenclature to refer to birds.
And you know its other name.
Tell me, what do you think it is?
The Timberdoodle.
Yeah, I've heard that. Do you know why that is a thing?
Because people didn't like to say woodcock.
Oh, no way. Seriously?
No, I'm not.
Is doodle and is timber wood?
I never made that connection before.
I literally just made it now. It never crossed my mind until this moment. I was even going to bring up Timberdoodle later and just say I didn't know where the name comes from.
So you have an even more juvenile mind than mine.
I guess so. Woodcock, Timberdoodle. Or the tree wang.
There's a new one.
Yeah, okay. So also worth mentioning, because I just learned it myself, cock of the woods is another name for the pileated woodpecker.
Oh, I've never heard that.
Yeah, I guess that red crest that it has resembles a cock's comb.
Sure.
And again, referring to the habitat of wood.
I can buy that.
So this is the last common name, I promise, Bill. So you like dogs, I know that, because you recently got a dog. And I know you pay attention. So can you guess where the name Cocker Spaniel comes from?
Something to do with chickens? Did they herd chickens or something?
Well, I'll give you a clue. It's not Latin for dog breed with the highest number of health concerns, even though that might be true.
Yeah, those pure breeds.
Yeah, so what it is that apparently Cocker Spaniels were bred to flush out game birds such as the woodcock. So Cocker Spaniel actually refers to the woodcock.
And that makes sense because these are a smaller sized bird.
Yeah.
And they're kind of in small, tight spaces.
Yeah.
And it would make sense you'd need a smaller dog to get in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, man, now that I realize that you didn't even know what a woodcock was in 1998, well, I think I know the answer to this question then. Have you ever had a woodcock?
Eaten it.
Yeah, it is a game bird.
Right,
so,
it is. I know people hunt them, but no, I never had.
How many years
I'm
have
not
you
a monster.
Been vegan? Usually I say stuff like that.
No, I'm just kidding.
But how many years now has it been?
Oh, well, vegetarian since 96.
Okay.
And then vegan, I don't know, 10, 12 years. Something
Oh,
like
so even before you heard of one, you were a vegetarian, so you wouldn't have had it anyway.
I wouldn't have had it yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it. All right, so let's just move on to the general and specific epithets. So Scolopax is just Greek for the woodcock, which is pretty boring. It's just the word for that, or the name for that bird. But previously, it was in the genus Philohela, which, according to author Diana Wells, means bog-loving. But to me, Philohela sounds more like sun-loving, but I don't know Latin all that well, so it must mean bog.
That wouldn't make sense because they come out to do their thing when the sun's not even out, so...
Yeah, maybe we'll get into that a little bit later.
Okay.
So the species name is minor, so that's just Latin for smaller, and this is in comparison to the Eurasian woodcock, Scolopax rustica, which just means country dweller.
Yeah, I was wondering why they just threw the minor in there. I didn't realize there was a European species too.
Yeah, so it's not something that we see around here, but it's just,
All right.
The namers of this species were thinking of the close relatives.
That was their point of reference.
Yeah, right. All right, so I mentioned this before, but the woodcock is part of the Scolopacidae. That's the sandpiper family. This family includes most of the North American shorebirds and most of the shorebird identification challenges. But don't worry, as Bill said, the woodcock is unlikely to be confused with the other shorebirds or even to be seen with them.
Right.
So there's nothing really to worry about there. All right, so now actually, let's move on to the woodcock's biology.
All right, but let's walk a little bit more because we stopped and
Yeah, I'm even shaking a tiny bit.
it's still windy.
So virtually everywhere I look, this bird is described as chunky.
Yeah.
It's like my favorite aspect of that description. It's definitely not the most important, but I think it's the best. So the major points for this bird is that it's bigger than a sparrow and smaller than a crow. So it's roughly robin-sized or even quail-sized. It's up to a foot long. It has large protruding eyes positioned far back on its head, so it looks really goofy.
Yeah.
And it also has a large head and a long bill, which is about 2 times the length of the head, which looks even longer since it's basically neckless.
And are you going to get into why its eyes are so far set back?
Oh, yeah, I'll get to it.
Okay.
Yeah. And its short legs and short tail definitely help the bill stand out even more. And lastly, it's really well camouflaged, often referred to as being dead leaf colored with light browns, blacks, buffs, and gray-brown tones. But an interesting note on the woodcock's goofy head, like Bill was getting to, their brain is actually tilted so far back in the skull that it's almost upside down. But when their bill is in the ground probing for worms, the brain and the eyes are almost positioned as if it's just normally looking outward and upward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a messed up bird, but in a very cool way.
Yeah. So while this is a pretty common species, their nocturnal habit and cryptic coloring makes them difficult to stumble across unless you know where to find them during their more crepuscular courtship display, but more on that later.
And for the listener that may not know, what does crepuscular mean?
Yeah, it's just that time of day where the sun is going down. So twilight. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Or when the sun is coming up.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
So you can show that off to your friends, folks.
Yeah. Whip it out at parties.
Yeah.
Right, that was a weird way to say that. All right, so as I said earlier, the woodcock isn't easily confused with many other birds, but it is relatively similar to the Wilson snipe and the long and short-billed dowitchers, which are in the same family, but the woodcock is chunkier than both of them, and it has more rounded wings in flight than the Wilson snipe.
I also believe, correct me if I'm stepping on your toes,
No.
but don't the striping on the head, doesn't it go a different direction between the snipe and the woodcock?
I think you're right. The woodcocks are, would you consider those like lateral? They don't go front to back, they go side to side.
Right, but the snipe is the opposite.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think so. So another difference with the snipe and the woodcock is that when you're wandering around a woodland swamp and flush a woodcock, apparently that chunky little bird will take off in a straight path, producing a whistling sound with its rounded wings. And I love the language in some field guides. I can't remember which one I poached this from, but it says the woodcock permits close approach, then explodes with whistling wings.
Nice.
I'm like, they can be flowery. It's a non-academic type of thing. So,
And we'll throw the sound in above the talk here.
oh yeah, good thinking. And that's compared to the slimmer pointed wing snipe, which takes off in a zigzag pattern, making them pretty difficult in terms of a game bird to shoot. And people used to hunt them with net guns, actually, until
Really?
accurate enough guns came out where they can shoot them outright. Yeah.
I never knew net guns were an actual thing.
Yeah, apparently for snipe.
And we should say, for the listeners out there who might be scratching their heads, snipes are a real bird.
Yes, and I should mention that the snipe and the woodcock are the only 2 game birds in the sandpiper family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, Bill, this is another little side shoot because that's what I do. I always go off on these tangents. What's another name for a sharpshooter in the military?
A sniper.
Yes. And apparently, by the 18th century, the word sniper was being used by some English officers serving in India, which was under British rule until 1947. And when they wrote home, they would refer to a day of rough shooting as going out sniping. Yeah. So I guess it took a lot of skill to shoot a snipe with a flintlock gun, but sharpshooters really weren't called snipers until the early 20th century in World War I. Yeah.
But it has... Yeah, we got
Goose.
some Canada geese flying over there.
Yeah. So the Audubon Field Guide and Eastman both claim that woodcocks also take off in that zigzag pattern, like the Wilson snipe, but it seems like there's a lot of inconsistencies between those type of like non-academic sources. So I didn't want to say for sure that it did, but the Wilson snipe definitely does. The woodcock might.
And
the zigzag pattern.
I got to jump in here because you mentioned Eastman.
Yes.
And longtime listeners will know we're referring to John Eastman, whose books we mentioned many times on the podcast. Now, I don't know if you saw it. Someone sent us an email or made a comment about how his books, most of them are out of print.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a shame.
So especially his, book of Forest and Thicket and Swamp and Bog, you can get digital versions through Amazon, but actual physical copies, usually you have to buy them used, and they're not cheap.
Oh, I could definitely see it not being cheap.
Yeah.
Every time like a cool naturalist book goes out of print, there was like a mushroom one a few years ago that went, and the price went up to like over $150. It was crazy.
It was so disappointing to find that out, because, man, those books are good.
Yeah, they're great. I did read a review in... Do you remember how sometimes like Nature will have like notes or something? It's not like official articles, but it's, just like part of their journal.
Yeah.
There was a review of Eastman's book, and...
One of his books.
Yeah, one of Eastman's books, and it was the biggest complaint on it was that they said they really liked it, but the biggest complaint was that it seems like he's sourcing primary literature, but he never gives a word cited, and that's always been our complaint too.
Yeah.
And sometimes when we're doing research for a particular topic, we definitely must come across the same sources that Eastman had,
right?
But he didn't cite them. And that's why we always cite our sources, just so people can find the things we're actually talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
And one more thing about him, though, is when I started looking into his books after we got that email, I can't find anything on him online, like any background information or if he's attached to a university or what.
Yeah.
So if anybody out there has information that could lead us to get in touch with him, because, man, he would be good to interview for a bonus episode.
I mean, he's probably listening.
I hope so. If you are, John Eastman, we love you.
I have one hero.
Nice.
All right, so in terms of their habits, like I said, woodcocks are nocturnal. They hide in dense vegetation during the day, and they're most active during dusk, or like we said, the crepuscular hours. And this is why we're recording this episode later in the day than usual, because we're hoping that we can stumble across one.
Right.
But we didn't plan on it being so snowy.
Right.
Though I have definitely read accounts where woodcocks are at least rocking on snow, so maybe they'll be doing their display flights too.
And I did talk to our friend Rich. He's been on the podcast before. I actually drove by his house on the way here tonight.
Yeah.
He was out on his front porch. I stopped and we talked for a few minutes. And he said the woodcocks have been out in the field behind his house. And he said he would not be surprised if they were out this evening. So I'm
here's
hoping.
for hoping, yeah. Let's, maybe we can summon up some black magic by crossing our fingers.
I'm doing it right now.
Yeah. So I want to back up slightly and give a general overview of the woodcock's range. And I'm just doing this so you'll know if you can find this bird in your neck of the woods. So they're found all year and during the winter throughout most of the southeastern U.S. and up the East Coast up to Massachusetts. So you won't really find them north of Arkansas or North Carolina unless you live closer to the East Coast. And only during the winter, their range extends what little it can to the southern borders of Florida and Louisiana and eastern portions of Texas. In terms of the breeding season, woodcocks migrate solitarily at night, and their spring migration happens pretty early compared with other species, and some males will even start migrating north during January in warm years.
Whoa.
Yeah. So during the breeding season, they're basically found throughout the entire eastern U.S. and up into southeastern Canada. During the spring and summer, males do their courtship sky dances, which we'll get into later. They'll mate and raise young, and then they'll return to their wintering grounds in the fall, again migrating at night.
Okay.
So in terms of the preferred habitats, so now that you know if they're in your state or not, now you can see where exactly in your state to look for them. Right. So woodcocks like young shrubby deciduous forests. They like forest edges, old fields, and wetlands all throughout the eastern states.
All the places they're going to find worms.
Yeah.
Yeah, their preferred food.
And they definitely like moist soils because it's easier to dig around for worms in that type of soil.
When you were describing these guys, did you talk about how long their bill is?
I said it was about twice as long as their head, and their head's already pretty big. So
this long, probing bill.
Yeah, that's like an outstanding feature of the woodcock is their long bill.
I did read somewhere, maybe you read about this, but that they can move just the tip of their bill
Oh, I'll get into it.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
good.
Stepping on my toes, Bill. You know too much.
It's been a while. It's rusty.
All right, so this is where I'm going to get into some of the other names. So people also call the woodcock Timberdoodle, like Bill said, Hokuumpoke, and bogsucker. So I tried to figure out the
Hokuumpoke?
Hokupoke.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Hokupoke. I threw an extra M in there by mistake the first time, but Hokupoke. But at this point, I'm ready to accept that someone on Wikipedia just made that one up. I can't find it anywhere, but it sounds so weird that I wanted to include it. But I like to think that the bogsucker name comes from the fact that it's a combination that sometimes it lives near bogs and the fact that it eats worms by sticking its long bill into the soil. So what I'm picturing is a chunky little bird trying to suck up all the water out of a wetland with a straw.
Yes.
Can you picture that?
I can.
So
That's perfect.
Yeah, that may or may not be where the name comes from, but I don't even want to fact check it because I really like that interpretation.
That's good.
So Eastman also says that people nicknamed it Little Brown Ghost, specifically because of how hard it is to see during its flights. It's display flights that we'll talk about. But I didn't really see that anywhere else. Eastman finds a lot of weird shit.
Yes, he does.
All right, so before we get into the sky dance and mating and rocking and worm hunting, I think we should take a quick break for our sponsor.
Yeah, so we wanted to let everyone know that this episode is sponsored by Gumleaf USA. This company offers Wellington-style natural rubber boots for men and women. They're perfect for birding, for herping, for hunting, for farm work, or just standing on the sidelines of the soccer field as parents scream at their kids. They have a factory in Europe, and they've been making these rubber boots for over 80 years. And they are well-designed boots with all the features found in boots that are normally twice their cost. We've been able to test out a pair of these boots, and I have to say that I love them. They're fantastic. Steve?
I like them too, though Bill's been hogging them a lot lately. So.
I have, it's true. They're made from 85% natural rubber, which is why they can flex over 1 million times without a crack.
Whoa, where'd you get that from?
Now, that was on their website, and I have to say, they did not cite their source.
Maybe they'll hire you to flex it 1 million times. Let's see.
But competitive brands do use between 25 and 50% rubber mixed with plastics and synthetics. So you could say it's likely that if you buy a pair of less expensive boots, you would probably have to replace those well before your Gumleaf boots wear out.
Yeah.
And as I've mentioned on previous episodes, these boots have a lot of bells and whistles. They have a stitched neoprene cushion liner with a Vibram sole. They have comfort, durability, and quality. That's the hallmark of Gumleaf USA boots. Now, I do have to say, last night when I was here at Beaver Meadow for the Owl Prowl, it was pouring for almost the entire Owl Prowl.
Oh, yeah, that's why I didn't go. I'm kind of recovering from a throat thing right now, and I was like, nope. Sorry, Bill.
Well, I wasn't sure if we were going to get the owls, but when I talked to Tom, the naturalist here, he said, no, we're still going out. I think they might be around. And
you're also thinking salamanders, too.
Right. We were hoping to catch some salamanders, but the pond here, as you can see, is mostly still frozen.
Yeah.
But I was able to step out a little bit from the shore, and I have to say, people were saying, wow. I actually did have someone say, hey, where'd you get those boots?
Yeah, nice.
I almost wanted to say thank you, because we can use that.
Yeah.
But over the course of this 2-hour hike, we were going through the mud. It was raining. My feet stayed warm and cozy dry.
Nice.
So they really are great boots. And I'm going to use the tagline from Gumleaf here. Focus on your activity and not on your feet. So,
yeah, I like it.
Folks, go check out Gumleaf USA. And what's their website?
GumleafUSA.com.
Okay, Steve, you want to walk a little bit and we'll talk about the mating?
Yeah, sure. All right, so on to the most conspicuous thing that the woodcock does.
I think this is probably the reason they're the most well-known.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. So they begin breeding in early spring, as early as March here in New York, but the males can start displaying as early as December in their southern breeding range.
Is December?
December.
Whoa.
Yeah. So the display begins with the male making loud nasal, buzzy zeent or peent vocalizations over and over again about every 2 seconds while they're on the ground. And it almost sounds like an insect more than a bird. It also sounds a little bit like a nighthawk call, too.
It does. It sounds very similar. I'd say a good description is it almost sounds like you're quickly running your fingers along a comb.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And we'll play it for you now, since they're not calling currently.
Right.
But then they take flight, and they make extended high-pitched twittering and chipping sounds. So this is called the sky dance, and it's done by the males to attract females. So During the courtship, the male performs a circling upward flight followed by a rapid drop over their breeding grounds. So this entire flight is accompanied by those twittering sounds that I mentioned earlier, and it's easy to think that these sounds are vocalizations.
Right.
But they're not.
They only vocalize at the peak of the flight, right?
Yes. And these twittering sounds are actually made by air passing through the male's outer primaries on their wings.
Yeah, the primaries are like sickle-shaped.
Yeah.
And they make this sound, the wind makes the sound going through them.
Yeah. And as Bill said, when the bird reaches the peak of its climb, it produces this climactic, bubbly vocalization for as long as 15 seconds as it zigzags back to the ground like a falling leaf. But those are the only actual notes produced by its syrinx. So, as a side note, the twitters that are made by the wings, I think it sounds a little bit like a car from the Jetsons, if anyone's old enough to know that cartoon. Oh, here comes George Jetson now. Whoa. So this type of song, in quotes here, is produced by air passing over the feathers and is found in other birds as well. So just in North America, these include, but are not necessarily limited to, the Annas and black-chinned hummingbirds. Those are two birds that I actually saw when I was living in Utah. We were banding hummingbirds out there.
And their wings make a whistling sound?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's kind of like, I think it's a courtship thing as well.
Okay.
The common nighthawk also produces wing noises.
Yeah.
The ruffed grouse, that's the drumming.
Oh, okay.
Mourning doves, and rock doves. Though the rock doves only make the noise by quickly clapping their wings together during takeoff, and mourning doves can do this as well as their whistly wing flight.
Okay.
And have you ever heard that with the mourning dove, where you'll flush one and it'll be like a whistly wing like whir?
I gotta say, I always thought that was a vocalization. I never realized it was their wings.
Yeah.
Did you before researching this?
I remember reading about it somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe Eastman or something. I don't know.
I do want to say, comparing to the nighthawk, the woodcock always makes its peent from the ground, whereas the woodcock makes its peent in the air.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen. Wait. Do you say nighthawk?
Yeah.
Always in the air? Okay. I don't think I've ever seen a nighthawk not in the air, though.
Right. But if you hear the sound in the air...
They're so hard to find.
Right.
I think one time I might have seen one perched somewhere up in a tree.
Yeah.
But I'm also not convinced that it wasn't just a broken piece of branch or something.
They're so well camouflaged.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right, so even though woodcocks are typically solitary, sometimes a number of males will be in the same areas doing competitive displays for females over the same breeding grounds. So this is also known as a lek, and you'll see this in a number of other species all throughout the animal kingdom.
Grouse.
Yeah, I was going to say, like other birds, such as the sage grouse, but you'll see it in some mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and even fish and insects, like the orchid bee and the black swallowtail butterfly.
Yeah, I've never, heard of them or considered them as leks, but that makes perfect sense. And I just want to give the audience kind of a visual, a mental picture of what this is like. So here at Beaver Meadow, we're not there yet, but we're heading up to an area called the Arboretum, where they have a lot of native tree species planted. But up on the hillside overlooking the Arboretum is a big open area. They use it mostly as a meadow that they let grow wild. They mow it about every 4 or 5 years. And especially in those years after it's mowed, we get woodcock performing here.
Yeah, I think we went with your family last year.
Yeah. So think of, a large open area, usually surrounded by woods with some shrubs in that edge habitat. And that's where the woodcock are going to be hanging out during the day. And then during the spring, when it's time for the males to do their displays, they will emerge either a little bit after sunset or a little bit before twilight. So I forget what the candle power is. If there's a certain level of light, and I'll put that into the notes.
Yeah, it's low.
Yeah. So they'll come out, start their peenting, and the females will watch from the sidelines, seeing if they like what they see. But when the males peent, at a certain point, they're going to fly up into the air, and think of like a tornado shape or an inverted cone shape.
Yeah.
And as they spiral up into the air, I can't remember exactly how high they go, like 100, 200 feet.
No, I think it's about 400 feet.
Okay, yeah, it's high. So high that it's hard to see them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with the dark sky. it's so hard. Like the juxtaposition between them and the sky, there's not much.
Right.
That's tough.
And when they reach the top of that flight, the top of the cone is really wide. So the spiral starts at the ground, but then as you gain elevation, the spiral gets very, very wide. And you know they reach the top of that flight when you hear that beep, 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 that bubbly call, and then they zigzag back down to the ground. Mm-hmm. And I do have to say that, all those walks that I led here, they used to have them every Friday night during April here at Beaver Meadow. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they would extend into May. So we'd go out, look for woodcock around a little bit after dusk, and then we would head down to the ponds to look for spring peepers. And I did this, 5-6 years. So we did it a lot. And in all those times, all those walks, we saw woodcock, I'd say probably 50-75% of the time, but the woodcocks never got real close. Sometimes we could see them against the sky, but it was always hard to see because they're so well camouflaged, they're relatively small. Mm-hmm. But one time, we led a trip up to Algonquin Provincial Park, where we recorded our spruce grouse episode. And we took people to see woodcock there. And we had a woodcock land probably 5 feet away from the group.
Wow.
And most of the group there had never seen woodcock before. I was going out of my mind, and I was trying to get these people to appreciate this never happens.
Yeah, right.
You folks need to really be grateful that this bird is being so permissive right now.
Typically, if you get between, let's say, 5 and 10 feet of a woodcock, you usually won't see it until you're about 5 or 6 feet away,
right.
And then it'll flush,
right.
And you'll never know that you were close to the woodcock at all.
Yeah.
So to see one land right in front of you, that would be amazing.
and now that I'm relating this story, I'm wondering if my memory is making it more exciting. It was actually about 50 feet away. But it was close.
Yeah, Bill, I was there. We saw a picture of a woodcock.
All right, so speaking of that, it is starting to get dark.
Yeah.
The sun has set. So why don't we walk and you can keep talking?
Yeah, sure.
All
right, so the male woodcock, they mate with multiple partners, and they don't really offer any parental care. The only source that said the male also incubated and led chicks to food was the Smithsonian Field Guide to Birds.
Smithsonian.
It's a Smithsonian. They're usually pretty, good, but I didn't see it anywhere else. Everywhere else just said that they don't offer parental care. So
right.
I just wanted to mention that in case, who knows, maybe a listener knows a little bit more than us. So the female makes a nest in a shallow depression in leaf and twig litter, typically in young upland woods, and they typically lay about 4 eggs. After hatching, the female broods the nestlings until they dry off, but they leave the nest just a few hours after hatching, and they're probing for their own food 3 to 4 days later.
Whoa.
Yeah, they're quick.
So, okay, you're testing my naturalist memory here.
Sure.
Is that precocial?
Oh, man, I think you're right.
There's precocial and ultrical, right?
Yeah, ultricial I can't pronounce that.
Something like that. All right,
yeah.
we'll put that in the episode notes.
Sure. So, and I thought this was pretty interesting. During the early stages of incubation, the female will readily abandon the nest if she's disturbed. But in later stages of incubation, the female may flush from the nest and feign an injury to distract the intruder, which reminded me a lot of the
killdeer.
Yeah, so the female killdeer will do the same thing. And it's a member of a different family of birds, the Charadriidae, the plover family, but they're also ground nesters. So they have that in common at least.
I want to believe that is some kind of mimicry going on because they nest, I think, if memory serves, around the same time. So
I didn't even think about maybe a mimicry, but who knows?
Yeah.
So about a month after hatching, the young are completely independent, mainly leaving their siblings to be solitary, but it's not uncommon for small groups of 2 to 4 to stick together. And I've never seen it myself, but I read that while physical contact between individuals is rare, sometimes they do tug on each other's bills, which would be really cool to see. It's not too important, but I just wanted to mention it. That if you ever see some together, just watch them. Get your bins out and just watch them.
To see if they tug on each other's bills.
Yeah, because I would love to see some type of footage of that.
Yeah.
Or I should say, not your bins. Get your camera out. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, the woodcocks are nocturnal. So it mainly feeds at night and during crepuscular hours. and they mostly eat earthworms during that time. So the tip of their long bill, this is what Bill was talking about, is flexible. It has like a flexible upper mandible, and it's sensitive enough for the woodcocks to actually detect, capture, and extract worms and insect larvae that touch it in the soil without really needing to open the bill itself.
Right, so they can catch the worms without having to open their mouth.
Yeah, and there's like a type of like lab tool that does that. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. Almost like forceps.
Yeah, it's like a type of forceps that also is able to do that.
Yeah.
And I read someone comparing it to that. So they'll also eat insects, spiders, snails, and other invertebrates, but they'll also eat seeds from grasses, sedges, smartweeds, roses, like blackberries and alders, among others. But worms are their primary food, and I read one place that it's like 90% of their diet.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so speaking of earthworms, in my typical style, I'm going to briefly sidetrack here. So I read a short paper looking at the effects of tilling practices on earthworm abundance in agricultural fields in eastern North Carolina. They specifically chose areas where woodcocks were roosting, and apparently fields where there was conventionally tilled soil, 99% of the earthworms consumed by woodcock were Aporictodia, that's a non-native, or Diplocardia, and that's a native species. So 99% of earthworm species were just from those two genera. But in no-till fields, the researchers collected over 2,100 earthworms and identified 13 different species, only about 80% being in either of those genera, Aporectia or Diplocardia. But still, in terms of the actual numbers, over 2/3 were just a single species, Aporectodia trapezoides, and that's a European invasive species of earthworm. So still, it's most of their food's coming from a single species, and it's not even a native species.
Yeah, so that makes me wonder. I'd like to find out about the evolutionary history of woodcock and where were they, around the last ice age.
And are earthworms becoming more abundant with invasive species, or is the general number staying the same, but the species richness is decreasing? That's what I'm wondering. So is it still getting just as much food in just as many places, or is it expanding, or
Would we ever do an earthworm episode?
Well, I was about to say, I'm actually sick of being ignorant when it comes to earthworms, so we should really do an episode on earthworms in the future. That would be incredible.
Has anyone ever said that? I'm sick of being ignorant about earthworms.
Yeah, so hopefully in that episode I won't struggle so much with Aporectodia or Diplocardia pronouncing these earthworm genera, because I've never tried to pronounce them in my life, because I've never thought about earthworms all that much. So regardless, it seems that woodcock have a greater worm meal species diversity in their overwintering sites where farmers are practicing no-till agriculture. And nearly all farmers have switched to that in soybean fields in that area. So soybeans tend to be no-till.
And what area was this?
North Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so back to the woodcocks. So I want to touch on another weird thing that woodcocks do. It's called rocking. Have you heard of this?
I've not.
Yeah, so while walking, woodcocks will sometimes shift their bodies up and down and forward to back with each step while keeping their heads steady. So it's kind of a cool movement. I think I've seen YouTube videos where people put them to music. And it kind of reminds me of that diagnostic tail bob that the spotted sandpiper does while it's walking around wetlands.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like that, but instead of the tail bobbing up and down, it's the whole body doing this kind of rhythmic dance as it walks. So
is it doing this during breeding or just all the time?
I think it does it all the time.
Okay.
And many people have thought that this motion was used to disturb earthworms into moving, and the woodcock was somehow able to hear or feel that movement, and it would help them pinpoint where to probe for food.
Okay.
Now, does that sound like a stretch?
Pseudoscience-y.
Yeah, well, even Eastman mentions it, but he doesn't say that this is a proven fact, but he does mention it, and many field guides actually mention this as well.
Does this have anything to do with, I remember hearing somewhere that woodcocks will stamp on the ground to mimic the patter of rainfall and draw earthworms out?
It's the same thing.
Okay.
So I actually read a 2016 paper out of the Northeastern Naturalist by Bern Heinrich, another one of our favorite authors, and he mentions this. He actually shows that the idea that that it's for worm hunting was actually only proposed by a few observations and some confident guesses, but it's not really backed up by any real scientific vigor.
Okay.
Yeah, so...
It's a good story.
Yeah, right. So it's also worth mentioning that they will do this activity on days where the ground is frozen and earthworms really wouldn't be moving near the soil surface.
Yeah, but birds are kind of stupid.
Yeah, I know they're stupid. But so Bernheinrich mentions there's a few things that need to be proven before we accept this worm hunting hypothesis. So do woodcocks do it while we're not watching them?
Right.
You know, because most time when people are looking, that's when you notice it. That's how we learn things is by looking at it. But there's a bias there, you know?
And the act of observation.
Right. So, and also, can this little 6 to 8 ounce bird cause significant vibrations in the soil by rocking like that?
How far is that going?
Yeah. Do worms move in response to the woodcock steps? Is there even worms there? Can the woodcock sense the worms' movements? Can they locate the worms from those movements? So there are other hypotheses, though, for this rocking motion. So this includes mimicry of blowing leaves, even though they'll do it on calm days, too, where it's not so windy. Another one is that it may reduce detection by, quote-unquote, minimizing shadows. Even though they'll do it on overcast days as well, where they might not cast shadows.
Okay.
I don't even know what the minimizing shadows.
I was going to say what?
I wrote it in quotes in my notes just so I remember and made fun of it.
Somebody's reaching.
And then that paper from Bernheinrich, he actually proposes that it's an advertisement of unprofitability. So in other words, Heinrich thinks that it might be the woodcock sensing a mild potential threat and saying, "I see you and you can't catch me. I don't want to fly off and hide, so please leave me the f*** alone." That's what Heinrich thinks is happening.
I love Bernheinrich.
Yeah, if it was a big enough threat, they would probably just fly away. But if it's like a mild threat, maybe not. So there's a few reasons for this thinking. So it's conspicuous. The rocking ruins their camouflage. Sometimes the woodcocks will also flare their tails, prominently flashing white feathers up into the sides. This is known as a tail flare alarm.
Yeah, because I got to say, like, one of the rules of camouflage is you stand still and let your camouflage do its work.
And that's why they're so hard to find during the day, because they're usually still during the day, and they really blend in really well. But if they're rocking, they're ruining that.
I love the idea that they bob and rock, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, you think you can take this? You think you can take this?"
The way you're doing that seems, I think, in the way sometimes you put it, wrong. And don't say that ever again. No, I'm kidding. But another thing I want to mention is that they do it when they're being followed or when humans are around filming them. They'll also walk and rock as they're moving away from you. And then when you stop, oftentimes they'll stop.
Wow.
Kind of like how a killdeer does it.
Yeah?
Yeah. So why would they continue to hunt for worms while they're being stalked? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like if they're rocking as they're walking away from you, why would they do that? Doesn't make any sense. So it definitely seems like they're responding to some type of threat rather than worm hunting. So this, not having to fly away, like giving this signal, would certainly save the woodcock energy. Might not have to fly off or deal with being chased. It would also make some sense that they would do it in foraging areas because, they would probably be reluctant to fly away from those areas if they didn't need to because they're, good eating.
Sure.
And, of course, this hasn't been tested, but there's so many observations that are inconsistent with the worm hunting hypothesis that it's definitely worth looking into this and trying to study this on a more, specific level.
There's somebody's PhD study out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And Heinrich only wrote this in 2016 where he's suggesting this hypothesis, so there hasn't been that much time for people to really tackle it.
All right, hang on a sec. Folks, we're going to be quiet for just a second. Can you hear that?
Do you think that's it?
No, I think that's a spring peeper.
Oh, it is. That's what I think.
It's one sad, cold spring peeper saying, "Ladies, anybody out there?"
I'll work out.
Seriously, folks, right now we're standing in some brushy woods. Everything is covered in snow.
Oh, yeah. We had to stop a couple times because there was just gusts of snow just taking us out.
And last night when I was here, the peepers were in full force. It was about 50, 55 degrees when we started the hike at 7:30. By the end of the hike at 9:30, temperature had dropped 10, 15 degrees.
Yeah.
So, All right, I just wanted to point out that peeper. Sorry to cut you off.
No, not a problem. So now I kind of just want to finish up talking about the woodcock by bringing up their current status. And now that we know a little bit about this chunky little guy, maybe we'll care about its well-being. It seems like the more you know about something, the more you care about it.
Definitely, yeah.
So according to the IUCN Red List, the population trend is declining, but they're still in the least concern category.
Hey, good news.
Yeah, so even though the woodcock isn't in dire straits, it might be worth looking into why they're declining. So one possible factor for their steady decline is habitat loss and habitat degradation through exotic invasive species. So a preliminary study in Pennsylvania found that woodcock actually avoided exotic invasive vegetation when selecting nest sites, particularly multiflora rose and Tartarian honeysuckle.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So why?
That's all that's here.
Yeah, right. Especially here, yeah. But it's possibly because they leaf out earlier in the spring, earlier than natives anyway.
Yeah.
And they might be blocking the view of potential predators around nest sites. So that makes some sense. And they also found that nest success and habitat use decrease significantly with an increased percentage of exotic invasive woody vegetation. Remember, they like that woody vegetation for nest sites and to really hang out during the day. And the obvious management suggestions in this case would be to include the removal and control of invasive shrubs.
Yeah. That's good everywhere.
Right, yeah. So that's good everywhere, but specifically, it's probably going to help woodcock, especially, if you have a declining population, it's worth looking into.
Sure.
All right, so another paper suggested looking into lead poisoning as a factor that might be having an effect on the decline of woodcocks.
Lead shot?
Yeah, so while feeding, woodcock may be exposed to lead through soil ingestion, earthworm consumption, and accidental ingestion of the lead shot pellets. Yeah, so woodcocks do have relatively high levels of lead in their system, and they can trace the source of that lead through measuring lead isotopes in woodcock bones. One study found that 30% of the bones analyzed had lead concentrations above the biological threshold, but other studies kind of failed to find those similar results. And there's a lot of research that still needs to be done, including studies on like calcium, phosphorus, iron, zinc, and vitamin D levels in woodcock tissues, because those can affect or be affected by lead absorption.
Okay.
So why do we care about this? Is it for the bird's sake? A little bit, but probably it's more about us. The paper actually specifically says that we should focus on research efforts on game birds like the woodcock and mourning doves that are still legally harvested using lead shot. So they say such research would improve the understanding of linkages among species population trends, lead health risks, potential impact of continued lead shot use, as well as potential human health impacts from consumption of lead harvested birds. So to wrap up this episode, I thought I would conclude with a quote from Aldo Leopold that kind of ties into the hunting of these birds. The woodcock is a living refutation of the theory that the utility of a game bird is to serve as a target or to pose gracefully on a slice of toast. No one would rather hunt woodcock in October than I, but since learning of the sky dance, I find myself calling 1 or 2 birds enough. I must be sure that, come April, there be no dearth of dancers in the sunset sky. Aldo Leopold, man.
I love him.
That one is from a Sand County Almanac.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Page 34.
Nice.
All right, so do you want to go see if we can actually spot a woodcock?
Yeah, let's go, because it's almost full dark. So if he was performing, it would be now.
Yeah.
Now, while we're walking over there, and it is pretty close, so we should make it no problem.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't mention why the eyes are so far set back on the head.
Yeah, I said that the eyes kind of face forward and upward while they're probing in the ground, but I didn't really expand on that at all.
Because it's been a while since I've taught and read about woodcock, but if I remember correctly, aren't their ears located in front of their eyes?
Oh man, I did not look into that.
I'm pretty sure. So the reason that their eyes are set so far back is to make room for their ears.
Oh.
So when they're probing in the soil, their ears are actually closer to the soil so they can listen for earthworms better.
If that's true.
No, if that's true. This may be one of those things like when I thought that flying squirrels were the most numerous squirrel.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure. So we'll definitely look into that, folks, and put it into the episode notes.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe there is something more to this earthworm thing. But like I said, it could be true. it's hard to make that claim without, the actual research done on it.
All right, so we are right now entering the Arboretum area of Beaver Meadow, and this is probably like the most park-like setting here at the preserve. There's about 400 acres here. Most of it is upland and lowland forest. They got a 40-acre beaver pond. But as I said before, this area is an area where lots of native trees are planted and signed so people can come and get to know our different native species.
And we're actually walking right past the place where we banned birds.
That's right.
During the summer, yeah.
So this is where we ban birds because we have a lot of nice edge habitat surrounding the open area here. Mm-hmm. And we get lots of good warbler species, but mostly catbirds.
Oh, yeah. But still, if you've ever wanted to hold a warbler in your hands, find a local bird banding station. It's such a fun experience.
It's a great place to volunteer, folks. Just see if you can find any local bird banding operations where you live. And it's a great way to get close to bird species that you normally don't see or you might not even know are in your neighborhood if you're not a birder.
Yeah. We should definitely do a bird banding episode one of these days.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So we are at the edge of the meadow.
I remember seeing him here last year. Or maybe like in this field or something?
Yeah, this is where they usually perform. So I would be impressed if a bird is out now just because we do have snow coming down.
Yeah.
There's rough. A breeze. It's cold. There's little clouds of snow being blown up across the meadow.
Yeah. And I think we're not going to see anything tonight.
All right, folks. Well, this is going to be an episode where we don't find our target species.
That happens, yeah.
But I loved talking about the woodcock, and it was kind of nice to get back to a species-specific episode. It's been a while for us.
Yeah, and we specifically don't do those so much because we think it's more interesting to tackle like a topic rather than a species, But still, I'm glad we're doing this because by the time this episode comes out, so it's March 31st right now, by the time it comes out, hopefully you guys can hear it and then maybe go to a local nature center and maybe find a woodcock walk somewhere or maybe just go explore it for yourself.
Go to a nice open area. Hopefully the wetter the better, but
yeah.
Well, not too wet, I should say. But
yeah. Unless you get some gum leaf boots.
There you go. Nice.
All right. So we hope you enjoyed the episode. So first and foremost.
Wait.
Oh.
No, it's okay. Before you get into the patrons, there's a couple things I need to mention.
Okay.
There's a couple people we need to thank.
Okay, yeah.
All right. So in the last episode, we mentioned 2 listeners that had contacted us via email, via comments on the website. The first one was an email someone sent to us talking about how they had been paying attention to the bird sounds they were hearing.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't mention that person's name. We didn't bring it with us. But we wanted to thank Kieran for taking the time to do that and to share the list of 30 species with us. And we also have to apologize because we assumed Kieran was a girl.
Oh, I still thought that for some reason.
Well, when I did look it up, it is a name that is typically a male.
Okay.
So we're not sure, but I'm thinking it's a male. So sorry about that, Kieran.
Not that it matters in 2019, Bill.
I'm not saying it matters. Beyond that, we want to be accurate.
Sure, right.
And then I also wanted to thank Jeff Kozma. He was the one that sent us the updated listing of the American Ornithologist Union's listing of the downy and hairy woodpeckers because we were a little unclear on what the current status was in our downy hairy game episode. So thank you for that, Jeff. Thank you for taking the time to write in.
Yeah, thank you guys.
All right. Those are the 2 things I needed to do.
All right. So second most, we would like to thank our growing list of Patreon supporters. So thank you, Roger Shaw. Yeah, so we're thankful for every single patron, but at the end of every show, we give a special thanks to our top patrons. So thank you, Rob. We named the dog Indy, Dean, Christina, Gavin, Pollywog, Jacqueline, Sean, Jessica, and especially Ken, Diane, Morgan, Elizabeth, Daniel, Susan, Rachel, Orange Julian, and Alyssa. Thank you guys so much.
Wow, it's so touching to hear that long list. Thanks, folks. It means the world to us.
Yeah. And we also want to thank our new 5-star reviewers on iTunes. So thank you, Chase's Bears and Intermediatic. Keep those reviews coming, guys. It really helps us get the word out to more people. We also want to thank Always Wandering Art for their beautiful thumbnail. As always, links to their website and Etsy page will be in the episode notes. We also want to give a shout out to the Corner Pollinator Garden for mentioning us in their Addressing Common Concerns section on their website. They actually link to both of our tick episodes for their readers to get more information about ticks and tick-borne illnesses.
Great.
So a link to the Corner Pollinator Garden will be in the episode notes. Also, you could go check out those tick episodes if you haven't already. They're pretty good, I think.
And it's starting to get to be tick season.
Yeah. So as we said before, please go check out gumleafusa.com. We have links in the episode notes and on our website. If you have any questions of your own, if you have any comments or episode suggestions, send us an email at thefieldguides@gmail.com. Visit us on Instagram at fieldguidespodcast. Follow us on Twitter at fieldguidespod. Like and follow us on Facebook, and visit our website at thefieldguidespodcast.com.
All right, and I did want to jump in and remind people that coming up very soon, right now we're recording this episode at the end of March 2019, but coming up at the end of May 2019 is the Allegheny Nature Pilgrimage. So we've mentioned this on the podcast before. Steve and I are going to be there this year, and we're going to be leading a hike as we did last year. I don't know if we're going to be recording it. We may, but you can go to AlleghenyNaturePilgrimage.com, and if you don't know what the Nature Pilgrimage is, from early morning to late at night, you can choose from dozens of small group programs. You might be sitting and talking or taking a hike. So some programs are designed to last for an hour and a half, but there are also field trips that might last up to 4 hours. In the evening, you can attend presentations under the big tent, and there's also other evening programs as well. I know one of our favorites is the Bugs by Nightlight that our friend Wayne Gall does. And the topics there include trees, flowers, ferns, insects, birds, salamanders, tracks, mammals, geology, astronomy, and more. You might also find a class in things like yoga, papermaking, photography, and it's great for any age and any skill level. They have programs for kids, for adults. I believe there's even an X-rated nature walk for adults only.
I don't think it's X-rated, is it?
They refer to that in,
Oh, the topless hike.
Steve, you can lead that one.
Yeah. I'll get my nudist friends together.
So again, that's AlleghenyNaturePilgrimage.com. We'd love to see you there, and it's a chance for you to join me and Steve on a hike.
Yeah, hope to see you guys there. So if you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast, you can do so on patreon.com/thefieldguides or through our PayPal donate button on our website. But if you're like me and you can't afford to financially support a podcast right now, there are other ways you can help out. You can share our episode with friends or rate us and leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher. It really helps us get the word out to more people.
And don't forget, we do have episode transcripts available on our website. Thank you to listener Joe Stormer for making those possible.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
And parents, don't forget to let your kids get outside, let them get muddy, let them get dirty, flip over rocks and logs, let them have a good time out in the woods.
All right, guys, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next month.
See you next month.